Nurse notices something strange about a woman in a coma, and when the police arrive, everyone is shocked. In the United States, young nurse Emily had just been hired at a hospital in a small county. She worked every day and loved her job, treating everyone with great courtesy and care. Because of this, she was well known among the patients in the hospital. However, this also left her feeling more drained, as although she loved her job, she felt the pain of every person who came through the doors. She always put herself in others' shoes, and this empathy made her more generous with the patients, but also caused her to suffer when any of them passed away. One ordinary day, something happened that would change her life forever. Emily was on the night shift at the hospital. The shift was calm until ambulances arrived, and paramedics rushed in with a young man and a young woman. Both were severely injured and unconscious. As usual, Emily was ready and did everything she could to help the doctors save those two lives. Hours passed, and unfortunately, the young man did not survive. The young woman, however, survived but was in a coma, and the doctor said it could take days or even months for her to wake up. Shortly after, the families of the two young people arrived at the hospital, and it was a shock for both families to learn what had happened. Emily then learned everything. The two were a couple and were coming from a party with some friends. The young woman's boyfriend had been drinking a bit, and as a result, crashed the car at high speed into a pole. Both were not wearing seatbelts, which is why they suffered such severe injuries. The young man did not survive and passed away shortly after arriving at the hospital. The young woman, only 18 years old and named Jessica, hit her head and suffered a traumatic brain injury, which was why she was in a coma. Jessica's parents wept over their daughter's condition and prayed for her to wake up soon, but only time would tell when, or even if, she would improve. Emily, like the other nurses, began taking care of Jessica. As days passed, Emily developed a special fondness for Jessica. As everyone said, she looked like Sleeping Beauty due to her beauty and endless sleep. 90 days passed, and Jessica remained in the same vegetative state with no reaction. Jessica's parents visited the hospital every day, and even though she couldn't hear or speak, her parents talked to her about all the latest news. This moved Emily deeply, as she thought the love they had for Jessica was beautiful, a love Emily had never experienced herself, having been born in an orphanage and never adopted. Days passed, and the beautiful Jessica was still in her endless sleep. Emily still worked at the hospital and went to Jessica's room daily to check her condition, change her for, and perform other medical care. Spending so much time by her side, Emily felt closer to Jessica, even though she showed no signs of awareness. Over several days, Emily noticed that Jessica's mother began visiting her daughter alone. When she asked about her husband, the woman looked sad and said he had passed away a few days earlier. Emily felt the woman's pain and realized she was going through a very difficult time in her life, due to the loss of her husband and her daughter's condition. Time passed again, and it had been 4 months since the accident. Jessica's mother was there, as usual, but this time she seemed particularly sad. It was Jessica's birthday. Her mother wished she could throw a party and give her daughter lots of gifts, but that was impossible at that moment. Emily took special care of Jessica that day. Although it wasn't much, it was the most she could do for her. However, while changing Jessica's clothes, Emily noticed something strange about her abdomen, which seemed swollen. She immediately called the on-duty doctor. He said it could be fluid buildup, gas, or something similar, but that he would conduct an examination to find out. During the exam, the doctor and Emily were shocked. Jessica was pregnant. The doctor immediately called the police and reported the discovery. Several patrol cars arrived at the scene and began the investigation. Due to the commotion caused, Jessica's pregnancy quickly became news everywhere. The doctors believed it was impossible for her to be pregnant by her deceased boyfriend, as she had suffered a severe accident, undergone surgery, and was still in a coma. The hospital's cameras were checked, but nothing unusual had happened near her room. Jessica's mother was deeply confused. She wondered how her daughter could be pregnant in such a state and feared that something worse might have happened to her. However, despite finding it impossible that the child was her boyfriend's, the doctors conducted a DNA test. They compared samples of the mother's DNA with stored samples from the deceased father and amniotic fluid to determine the child's paternity. 2 weeks later, the result came in. The child was indeed her deceased boyfriend's. This pregnancy was considered a miracle by everyone, but due to Jessica's condition, the pregnancy could pose a risk to her life. However, Jessica's mother was against any procedure that would harm the baby, as she believed the child was innocent. Jessica began receiving even more special care from all the hospital staff. Gradually, her belly grew, and Emily wondered what the future would hold for this child, born to a mother who was unconscious and a father who had died not long before. Emily sometimes looked at Jessica and wondered what she would think of all this. Her face seemed serene, but to Emily's astonishment, Jessica opened her eyes at that moment and stared into the void for a few seconds before closing them again. The doctors checked on the young woman, but she showed no other reactions that day. However, the next day, her mother screamed for help. Jessica was awake. She tried to say something but couldn't. She was too weak from being unconscious for so long. It was a miracle that all of this was happening. The doctors advised against telling her anything about her boyfriend or father for the time being, but the pregnancy couldn't be hidden. Jessica looked at her belly and cried, but she still couldn't speak. Her mother comforted her, saying that everything would be okay. Gradually, Jessica began to move slowly and speak. While she was still recovering, her mother told her that her boyfriend couldn't be there at the moment and that her father had gone on a work trip. Jessica found it strange, but because she was still a little confused, she accepted it. However, the belly revealed that she had been unconscious for some time, but she began to suspect why her father and boyfriend weren't showing up. This made her anxious, so they had to tell her the truth. Jessica burst into tears when she learned that her father had passed away. However, she showed little reaction upon learning that her boyfriend had not survived the accident. The pain she felt from losing her father was unbearable. Even with a hoarse voice, she recounted what had happened with her boyfriend. They had fought, and she had broken up with him, but he wouldn't accept it. In the car, they argued constantly, and due to the confusion and the alcohol, her boyfriend crashed the car. Emily listened to everything from outside the room. Jessica's crying made her cry too. She wanted to do something to ease the young woman's pain, but there was nothing she could do. That night, Emily talked to Jessica. For her, it was a special moment, as she felt like a friend, even though Jessica was seeing her for the first time. It was a good conversation, but you could see the sadness in Jessica's face. She said she wanted to leave the hospital soon, but the baby was about to be born, and she didn't want to keep it. She admitted that she resented what was inside her, and that if she had woken up earlier, she would have forcibly removed the baby herself. This shocked Emily, but she tried to understand the pain Jessica was going through. A few weeks later, the baby was born. Jessica didn't want to hold the baby and didn't even want to know if it was a boy or a girl. Emily observed everything, but couldn't blame the young woman, as she might have been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or postpartum depression. So much had happened to her. Jessica was finally discharged with her baby, but the baby was given up for adoption because Jessica never wanted to see the child again. 20 years later, Jessica was now a mature woman, married, with 2 young children. She was successful in life, but had tried to forget the past. Her husband knew what had happened to her years ago and did everything he could to make her happy. She had needed therapy for years. Her mother passed away a few years after she woke up. This made her even sadder at the time, but she wanted to move on for her husband and her children. Jessica was happy, but every now and then, the weight of the past would come back in her memories. And no matter how much therapy she did, the past wouldn't leave her. She tried to forget the child she gave up for adoption, but sometimes she found herself wondering how he or she was doing. However, the moment she thought about the child, she felt a mix of sadness and anger and remembered the day of the accident. Because of this, she tried to forget the past and focus on the present. Jessica owned a flower shop. Cultivating roses and plants was her hobby, which over time became her main job. She felt calmer when she was surrounded by the beauty of nature. It gave her peace. She loved welcoming couples who wanted to make romantic surprises and bought beautiful bouquets of roses. There was a couple who started frequenting her shop, spending many minutes admiring the flowers. Jessica looked at them and remembered when she was young with her late boyfriend. The young woman picked up a cactus and said she would take it. Jessica found it interesting because few people bought cacti, but the young woman said she admired cacti because they are one of the most resilient plants, a symbol of strength. However, the sad part is that to adapt to difficulties, they grow thorns that prevent others from touching them. Jessica was impressed by the young woman's wisdom. She handed her the cactus, and the couple left. A few days later, the couple was back again. Jessica greeted them, and the young man said they were going to buy a rose because someone dear to them had passed away. Jessica noticed the sadness in both of them, but the young man seemed more shaken. She then gave them one of the most beautiful roses she had and didn't charge them anything. They were both surprised and thanked her very much. That couple reminded her a lot of herself in the past, and the pain of losing someone close made her remember even more. Days went by, and she felt the past weighing more and more on her mind. She thought a lot and then made a decision. She was going to look for the child she gave up for adoption. She wanted to at least know if the child was okay. Maybe that way, she could finally forget everything that had happened. Jessica talked to her husband and explained everything to her young children in a more subtle way, as they were still too young to understand everything that had happened to her. Her husband supported her decision, and she began to look into her past. Jessica started at the orphanage where her child was left. She was nervous, but knew she wouldn't find any children there since 20 years had passed. However, shortly after entering the orphanage, Jessica heard someone call her name. It was Emily. Jessica was confused because she didn't remember her. Jessica then explained everything that had happened while she was in a coma. Jessica listened carefully, but talking about the past still made her anxious. She asked what Emily was doing there. Emily was honest and said that Jessica's case had affected her deeply because she had been there witnessing every moment, from the time she arrived after the accident to the moment she left and gave up her child for adoption. Emily had visited the orphanage from time to time to check on how the child was doing. During these visits, she had contact with the other children, and knowing what it was like to live in an orphanage, she grew attached to all of them. She started visiting the orphanage more and more often until an opportunity arose to work in the infirmary there. She didn't hesitate and applied. From that day on, Emily said she found her purpose in life and loved all those children, which is why she continued working there. Jessica asked about her child because she wanted to see him or her, as she felt something was missing in her life and a weight she didn't understand always lingered in her consciousness. Emily looked at her for a moment and said, "I stayed by your child's side from the moment they came in until the moment they left. Your baby was never adopted and left the orphanage when they turned 18. I still have contact with your child, but I need to inform them that you're looking for them, and that's why I can't say more about their whereabouts." Jessica understood and gave Emily the address of her flower shop. As she left, Jessica noticed some cacti at the entrance, placed in a higher spot so the children wouldn't touch them. The pots had the symbol of her flower shop. She asked Emily why there were cacti there. Emily said she liked cacti because they symbolize strength, but the sad part is that to adapt to difficulties, they grow thorns that prevent others from touching them. So she placed them high up to avoid hurting the children. At that moment, Jessica's heart pounded. She asked who had brought the cacti. Emily said it was one of the girls who lived at the orphanage. Jessica left in tears, without saying anything to Emily. Finally, she discovered who her baby was. It was that girl who always came with a young man to her flower shop, as she had said the same words as Emily about the cacti, and had also lived in the orphanage. She felt a mix of emotions she couldn't describe. She hardly slept that night. The next day, while she was at the flower shop, the same girl from that day entered the store. Jessica was emotional, and before anything else, she asked the young woman for forgiveness. However, the young woman immediately said it wasn't her. Jessica was surprised and listened to the young woman. She introduced herself as Samantha. Samantha explained that she was born in the orphanage but was adopted at 14. However, she had always kept in touch with Michael because they grew up together in the orphanage, and he was her best friend. Michael was Jessica's son. Samantha explained that, with Emily's help, they had managed to find out where Jessica was. But Michael never had the courage to talk to his mother because he knew what had happened and that she didn't want him. So, he thought she would never want to talk to him, But even so, he asked Samantha for help and pretended to be a couple so he could go to the flower shop and see his mother without raising any suspicion. But one of his childhood friends had recently passed away, and this shook him deeply. Emily got in touch with him, but Michael was very sad and continued to believe that Jessica wouldn't want to meet him. That's why Samantha went to see Jessica, so she could at least try to talk to him. Samantha and Jessica immediately went to Michael's house. It was a very simple place, but Jessica could see the many roses at the entrance of his house that he had bought from her. She rang the doorbell. Michael opened the door and, upon seeing her, unintentionally said the word "Mom." Jessica hugged him immediately, and he hugged her back. In a simple hug, she felt all that weight lift off, the entire past being erased. She never could have imagined feeling something like that. They both cried with emotion. Mother and son talked for hours. She apologized for leaving him at the orphanage, but Michael said it wasn't her fault, that everything she went through must have been horrible, and that she did the best she could for him at that moment. Michael also said that Emily had always treated him well and always protected him. She was always there for him. This made Jessica happy, knowing that someone had taken care of her son when she couldn't. Michael met Jessica's husband and his siblings. He also became part of his mother's life. Jessica knew that the past might not be erased, but she grew to love her son. She wished she could go back in time and change her decision, but time doesn't turn back. So, from that day on, she would do everything she could to be the most present mother possible. I hope you enjoyed the story. Like, comment, and share. Thank you for watching.